super successful with best-selling author Gabe Biondo. So Gabe, as I mentioned, is the author of Bridge of Fire, Sales Secrets from the Super Successful. He is also Enterprise Account Executive at Savian. How are you doing today, Gabe? Excellent. Oh, no, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you back. You can actually catch a conversation that Gabe and I had last year, I think it was, leadforensics.com/podcast. If you go and have a look there, you'll be able to find the conversation we had last year, which I remember very fondly, Gabe. So we're coming to you today. It is World Book Day. When I was a kid, it was one of my favorite days at school because we used to dress up as our favorite characters from literature and stuff. And you get a token, you get a free book. That sadly doesn't happen anymore. I'm not dressed as my favorite literary character, as you might imagine, but we definitely wanted to speak to a sales author, Gabe, and that's why I remembered you saying you'd written a book, Bridge of Fire, and that's why we're welcoming you back. So my first question to you is, what was it in particular that drove you to want to write a book about sales?
Yeah, it was kind of an accident for me because I took a sabbatical from a job that I had as an individual contributor for roughly 11 years. Excuse me. And then in the mornings, I would get up and go grab coffee and I would just start writing. And a buddy of mine challenged me to write an article on LinkedIn. And so I wrote an article and it did well enough that it caught the attention of just kind of I hate to say random stranger because now he's a good friend of mine, but a random stranger, and he reached out and said, "Hey, look, if you put 8 more of these together, you have a book." And I had time off. I had nothing else to do, so I decided to. He kind of mentored me through. He had written a couple of books before, and they did well, so he mentored me through kind of the framework. The one thing that I didn't realize, and I hate to say this, but a lot of people who say, "Oh, I would love to write a book." It's a lot easier than you actually think it is because you just kind of outline your chapters and figure out what you're going to talk about. And then you can kind of rearrange. There's no real concrete way of arranging it. So he helped me kind of from that one article that I wrote in LinkedIn, put together 7 or 8 more chapters. And, then we had a book.
So, I mean, obviously, the book is it's aimed to create an emotional journey for those in the sales profession who maybe not quite attaining where they want to be. Um, could you share like how does Bridge of Fire achieve that, and why is it important for salespeople to recognize that an emotional connection can be beneficial between them and who they're selling to?
So that is the framework of the book. It's not a here's how to sell, which I'm glad you pointed that out because, most of these are, give me some of the tips and tricks that come out of it. And there's certainly none of those. It really is, it kind of starts off with talking about, and this is, I believe in the introduction, it is sales is not really that hard. We're just talking and we're just typing the majority of the time. The most difficult part for the average salesperson, that's what it is. It's getting the average salesperson to be a top seller. The average salesperson tells themselves something, which tends not to be true. They believe in that something that is not true, and then they act inside of that belief system. These people don't buy. I'm not really that good. This product is not as good as it should be in order for me to sell it. And that's a lot of just kind of internal emotional barriers that you're putting up because you're basically separating yourself from your success. You're saying, if this was different, then I would be successful. And the book helps kind of unpack some of those negative emotions and really get you closer to the activity of selling within yourself, removing the fear or using fear as a weapon, right? Using it to your advantage, using the anxiety, building trust, having honest discussions, not only with your clients, but with yourself. Be optimistic, but also be realistic. Some people have a tendency to think they're much better than they actually are. Probably not true. Some people think they're really not that good when they're really good. Probably not true, right? So you have to kind of marry those emotions with positive forward momentum without being unrealistic, right? In either direction, optimistic or pessimistic.
So what was it that I'm curious as to what your personal experience was then, Gabe, to lead you to come to these conclusions that actually it's not we're thinking that this is the problem, but actually it's more of this. What are those things that made you, I guess, want to write the book in the way it's written about the emotion, that sort of
Yeah.
thing?
So yeah, it's a good question. So when I was at my previous organization, I was leading sales training, and it was just a couple of hours with me. It was a week-long sales training, but I only had a couple of hours. It was non-scripted, and I would get up in front of the classes and I would talk to, sellers. Some sellers were brand new to the company, but not new to sales, and some people were both brand new to the company and new to sales. So I had a full range of, excuse me, full range of different types of people. But that was the most memorable part of those classes. Those and years, even to this day, I still have people say, "I remember you spoke in front of my class, and it was very impactful." So that really is what gave me the fuel, right? Talking to all of those people. But to answer your question a little bit more directly, what I would hear though, because I was a top salesperson, what I would hear though is why I was the top salesperson and why they were not, or why they couldn't be. Well, because you have this particular company in your backyard, therefore that gives you an unfair advantage, and it's all just it's a bunch of BS. So I started to see and like, oh, you think there's something special about me. You think I don't go through the same range of emotions that you do. You think that I never have done this. So that really what was, and it was hundreds of those conversations. So I was able to deduce the fact that everybody goes through the exact same thing. They're just by their own false limitations stopping where they're in average. They're stopping in that mediocrity. So I was like, I bet I can, even if I can just, and I know that every author says this, but if I can just help that one person. But I knew that it was so consistent for the average salesperson to walk up and give me all the reasons why they're not, and none of it had to do with themselves, right? And this was not, like I said, it was not, it wasn't objective. It wasn't realistic. It was false. It's like, well, you have so and so next to you, to help you. I'm like, I haven't talked to that person in a year. So it was those types of conversations. Like, you really think that's what gives me this advantage, where you could be doing the same exact thing, but you're just putting all of these barriers in front of your success and a lot of more emotional blockage. And look, I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and the book doesn't even cover any of that. This is just random, ordinary, everyday ego is one thing. Well, I'm not going to make 50 phone calls. Our product should be good enough where all I have to do is this. I'm like, well, it's going to take 50 phone calls or whatever that metric is. And so I would answer these types of questions or field these types of conversations so randomly, so consistently throughout the decade that I was at that organization as a top seller that I figured once I took some time off, compile the book, get it out there and see if it can help some people.
So again, yeah, you're mentoring the sort of, and it does say in the book, that it's for salespeople in the lower 80%.
That's right.
The top 20. And you have touched on it, I think, briefly in the start of your answer of the previous question. But can you just explain a bit more, elaborate perhaps why it was that specific audience you're going for, and what are some of the common objects? Like you've detailed some of them, but what are those other challenges that they're facing in their careers if they're saying it's stunted them?
Yeah, you know what? And listen, I was in that lower 80% at some portion of my career. First of all, bigger audience, bigger target. But it's the ironic thing is that the top 20% are the people who actually buy that book. It's not the lower 80%. That's the ironic thing. Vast majority of people that have picked it up, read it, and have emailed me or hit me up on LinkedIn, I've looked at their profile, they're top seller. They've won the trips and all of that other good stuff. So that's really the difference, is that the top sellers, they continue to sharpen that axe. They continue to read. But the reason why I chose that is because the one of the chapters starts off with a quote that says, the most devastating thing is how close you are to success prior to giving up. And I was there so many times. I wanted to quit so many times. And there's a really good buddy of mine. His name's Peter, and he runs marathons. And I said, man, how do you do that? How do you run that far? Outside of the training and everything. He goes, I just pick a spot, and like it's a hill, this far away, As long as I can get to that hill, then I'll just give myself permission to give up. Right as I'm approaching that spot, I just pick another spot. And that's what I see the difference of the people that are in that lower 80%. They do just enough to get by, and they think that getting to the conclusion of the end of that marathon, if you will, to the big seller, to a consistent, book of business, they think it's so far away, or they take all 28 miles and put it into their head and like, there's no way I can do this. And this book just kind of walks them through very, very systematically of like, here's kind of how you begin. You got to start off with being honest with yourself, being honest with the customer, and being honest with your product. But the most important thing is that 80% that you're just inches away. You're just a few decimal points sometimes from that top 20%. And it's the Pareto principle, right? Top 20% does 80% of the revenue, right? And so if you can get yourself out of that 80%, not only do you protect yourself from unemployment and all that other good stuff, but you get the favorable stuff, right? You get all the spoils. You win the trips, get the big paychecks, and all of that stuff. So that's where that targeted audience I thought was ripe for that type of discussion.
So, Gabe, short of obviously first buying, where can somebody start then? If somebody's watching this now and they're thinking, "Oh, do you know what? I think that's me. I think I am in that lower 80%. I want to get into the 20%." What can they do other than obviously buying the book? What can they do to start making moving the needle on that? Shall we say?
Yeah, I don't want to say that it's easy, but it's more simple than most people will get it, because what inevitably what will happen for anybody that's watching this or listening to this, first of all, is just identify where you are, right? If you are in that middle of the pack, do not do yourself a favor. Do not provide yourself any reasons or excuses as to why you are there. Just stop. Just okay. I'm in the middle of the pack, or I'm brand new and I want to be number one. So identifying where you are is the number one step. Number two step is start to write down very simply why you think you are. Is because I don't study enough? Is it the product very well? Is it because do not give it any concrete, like, well, my territory. I was managing this one individual and he said, well, nobody buys in the Midwest. Like there's 6 or 7 states there in our Midwest, and his territory. And it's like, and there's a lot of business there, a lot of big cities. But what most people will do is give themselves this broad stroke reason as to why they are there, and then just stop right there. And that's kind of career suicide, because it's not honest. So being honest with yourself is step number one. Where am I at? Why do I feel like I'm with some addressable reasons, right? I'm not making enough calls. I'm not setting my product well enough. I'm not getting out in the field. I'm not doing partner events. I'm not following up on the market. If that is the reason, then make a very quick step to, okay, what can I do? Just 3 bullet points. I'm not doing enough marketing events. All right. Month of February, I'd like to do, it's months of March or whatever month it is, I'd like to do X amount of this. I'm not making enough phone calls. All right, my goal is to make X amount more phone calls a day. And I think if you can write those lists down, come act inside of forward momentum, not just commotion, not just rearrange your email, right? Well, my email is not arranged enough, but no customer has never bought from you because your email is not arranged the right way, right? So it is doing action steps that actually are going to lead to success. That is the biggest thing that one must do, because I feel that thousands of these conversations with my is that most people think that it's this monumental task they have to do. They need to forward. That's just wake up a little bit earlier, put in an extra 30 minutes, make an extra X amount of phone calls. Doing those things compound on each other. Planting seeds in the field, right? If you just plant one, chances of it producing the type of fruit, maybe, but if you plant 100 of them, your chances of bearing fruit much better.
So, I mean, obviously, having written your own sales book, Gabe, there must be a number of sales books that you've read. Could you just for our audience here, could you give some recommendations, maybe 3 sales books, other than obviously Bridge of Fire, that you would recommend they go and check out?
Yeah, Brian Tracy, anything that Brian Tracy puts out is great. It's fantastic. He's a tactician. He has he's fantastic at what he does. Eat the Frog is a really good one for new salespeople. Um, there is a book out there. It's not necessarily a sales book, but there's a book. It's Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, that talks about just having a burning desire. And that's one thing that I do want to touch on before I make any more recommendations is Think and Grow Rich is probably the Bible for any successful, not only business person, but salesperson. Um, Back to your earlier question, what can one do? It's decide if you really truly want to succeed, because it is going to take some work. So if you want that, then you can muster up passion for it, continue that passion consistently, then you'll create what Napoleon Hill calls in Think and Grow Rich, a burning desire. And I'm not ruining the book for you, for anybody who hasn't read it yet. And that comes out in like literally the first paragraph. So Think and Grow Rich is another good one. Brian Tracy. Anything by Tony Robbins is really, really, really good. He has Awaken the Giant Within, which is a decades old book, but Awaken the Giant Within talks about the mechanics of creating that burning desire. Then it also talks about there's a couple of chapters in there on how to organize your business. It's not specific to like a salesperson, but you can apply it to sales very easily.
Excellent stuff. Well, Gabe, thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. I'm going to come back to you in a second, but for a final question. But just before I do, obviously this webinar is brought to you by Lead Forensics, and that is software which identifies the anonymous B2B visitors to your website. And if you'd like to, so I'm going to start that again. This webinar is brought to you by Lead Forensics, which is software which sorry, it's the last thing on a Friday, and I'm really starting to get a little bit tired. I do apologize, Gabe. I'll get this one now, don't worry. But just before I come back to you, Gabe, this webinar is obviously brought to you by Lead Forensics, which is software which identifies the anonymous B2B visitors to your website. It shows you their customer journey, what links they've clicked on, pages they've looked at, and all in real time, meaning you can tailor your sales approach and better close those deals. To book your obligation-free trial or sit a demo with us, just let me know using the poll, which is on screen now. I'll leave this up as we come to the end of our conversation with Gabe here. And also, if I could ask you to fill out the webinar feedback survey, which is the other form, which is on screen now, I'd love to hear what you loved about this week's webinar. So yeah, Gabe, it's been a joy once again to chat to you, as the author of Bridge of Fire, and you've shared an awful lot of insight. If I was to ask you for one key piece of information that you would like the audience to go away with today, the one thing you want them to remember from this webinar, what is that piece of advice? What is that bit of info for them?
The one thing that I would challenge everybody to do is, begin the journey. If you are in the middle of the pack, if you're not doing as well as you would like to in your career, start right this second. As these sounds are hitting your ears, start and make a decision. And make a decision to improve yourself, not only for yourself, but for your family and your friends and just your overall disposition. Like it's not fun being in the middle or the lower end of the pack. It's not enjoyable for you. It's not enjoyable for anybody else. So make a decision, commit to yourself to do the work. And the biggest piece of advice that I've provided everybody, and I've had the fortunate ability to see people who've gone from either starting off in their sales career or middle of the pack, make the decision and create a ridiculous amount of success, is that now that you are there, if you're on your way there, get there and then turn around and help other people. That's why the name is called Bridge of Fire, right? It's like this big, huge burning bridge. Everybody is so afraid to cross from going from mediocre to just an absolute successful overall person, successful. And it's a bridge of fire. It's very tough to get over mentally, emotionally. But once you're over there, now it's your obligation to help other people do it. And that's the reason why I wrote the book, is because I've had a tremendous amount of success. And I've had a lot of mentors. I've read a lot of books. I've had a lot of people help me over my own bridge of fire, right? And once I got over there, now it's my obligation to continue to help people go over. Chapter 7 is let go of the ego. There's no ego in it. Yes, you're successful. Yeah, you created a good product, selling it very well. Or you're selling somebody else's product really, really well. Great. Now go help other people do it. That's my final thought.
Amazing stuff. Well, Gabe Biondo, thank you so much for joining us today. Remember to keep an eye on Lead Forensic Socials for news of our upcoming webinars, and we'll see you again very, very soon.